Adam, quick question for you. What motivates you to work?
Wait a minute. Is this a trick question?
No, I'm being serious. I want to know what motivates you to work. Like, what motivates you to have the job you have?
Well, let's see. I mean, not to be too cheesy, but a big motivation these days for me is leadership. You know, I get to see my awesome team operate at higher and higher levels all the time. And I'm also fortunate that my work generally fits my values. You know, I feel like it makes a real impact.
So what I'm picking up is that your primary motivation to work is a sense of purpose and belonging.
Well, I admit earning money is also part of the puzzle. So yeah, it's all about the Benjamins.
Nobody says that anymore.
Okay, how about getting that dough?
Also, no.
Greenbacks?
Dude, no.
Okay. It's also about the money. Look, my wife and I are raising a toddler, and as I've learned since becoming a dad, kids are expensive.
Right, they cost a lot of money and for a long time. We're talking about daycare, food, clothes, toys, healthcare.
Okay, yep, I get it.
But then there's also ballet lessons, karate lessons, tennis lessons, piano lessons, horseback riding lessons, a smartphone. Oh, a replacement smartphone for the one that she drops in the lake. And then, oh my gosh, college tuition.
Whoa, Maude, you're giving me a headache just thinking about, a smartphone for our toddler, but... Look, you're also right. I mean, most of us need to work in order to pay for our home, our cars, our utilities, so many other things. Plus, we try to save what we can for retirement and college tuition.
And don't forget about your daughter's wedding.
Just stop it, Maude.
Okay. Sorry, sometimes I get ahead of myself and I just sort of can't stop. But let's circle back on something I mentioned earlier. Healthcare. I'm assuming you won't be paying the full cost out of pocket for every broken bone and every trip to the dentist, right?
First off, let's hope for no broken bones. But yeah, New Belgium definitely helps out with medical expenses in a major way. The company pays about 80% of total premiums on behalf of us coworkers.
And based on what I know about New Belgium, I'm guessing you also have access to things like life insurance, disability insurance, profit sharing, vacation days, and stuff like that.
Okay, I get your point, again with the lists. But yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of things New Belgium invests in that brings value to my life beyond the paycheck.
And that's precisely what we're talking about today. Because too often, American workers think about our pay only in terms of, as Adam would like to say, the Benjamins. But these days, more and more companies are adopting this idea of total compensation.
Yeah, total compensation is both a straightforward idea that defines the entire value our employers bring to our lives in exchange for work.
And it's a philosophy that invites both employers and workers to think holistically about compensation, meaning pay becomes just one of the many ways that businesses reward and value employees.
And this gets back to a core tenet of humanized business. This idea that companies can chart a more profitable path if we reverse our traditional thinking about our relationship with employees. Instead of workers do the work and then businesses pay them for it, it becomes business invests in workers across the broad spectrum of what can be considered compensation. And in return, workers invest themselves in the business and make it more successful.
About now, you're probably thinking, this sounds pretty awesome and all, but how can companies successfully adopt and put into practice this awesome philosophy of total compensation? Well, it can be trickier than you think. But we're here to sort out the red flags from the green ones.
So let's get rolling. Welcome to Green Flags, the podcast about the quest for a better business model, one that puts humanity at its core and makes companies more profitable as a result.
I'm Maude Standish, futurist, innovation consultant, and executive producer at Odd Media.
And I'm Adam Fetcher. I've spent my career helping companies define their values and turn them into meaningful action. And I'm the Senior Director of Communications and Public Engagement at New Belgium Brewing Company.
We're still climbing up the pyramid of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in this episode, we're focusing on the fourth tier, esteem needs, which include things like recognition, respect, and freedom.
Right. And the philosophy of total compensation actually hits on all of those topics.
And this different way of thinking, well, as Adam said, this enables a different type of relationship between employers and employees, one built on mutual respect.
Respect might seem like a nice to have, but respect or lack thereof, it has real economic consequences.
Numerous studies have shown that feeling respected in the workplace drives employee commitment and engagement. And a recent study by the Novak Leadership Institute found that workers between the ages of 21 and 34 increasingly value respect over fun perks that we hear about, like happy hours and that free artisanal kombucha.
Right. And what good is a paycheck if you work like 80 hours a week, you don't feel respected by your boss, you can't take a vacation, and you end up feeling like your work takes more from your life than it gives back?
Sadly, this scenario isn't that far-flung here in this capitalist culture we've built. In fact, a recent study by Axios found that 42% of workers were feeling burnt out globally. And that's honestly not really surprising to me, because quite frankly, too many companies still see the goal as getting as much out of workers as possible for the lowest cost.
And that's basically what happened to Bobby Ciccaglione when he first started out in the tech world.
The culture itself just left a lot on the table as far as how they treated employees. Not only just how they compensated them, but just like it was often just like you're sort of required to be all hands on deck all the time with no regard for burnout, with no regard for your mental health.
Bobby started his career in tech about 15 years ago, looking to gain experience as a product manager and developer.
And the cultures that I had been in particular, these like really early stage companies where they hadn't raised very much money at all. You know, every 6 months was time to get nervous and see if we were going to be able to survive.
Then he landed a job in San Francisco, working for an internet radio startup called 8 Tracks.
I was the first paid employee at the company, and I made $42,000. It was not a lot. I was living paycheck to paycheck. And oftentimes at the end of the month, I didn't know if my debit card was going to go through.
And while Bobby knew that $42,000 in the Bay Area wasn't exactly a livable wage, he had actually sought out this company.
That was the dream. I get to work in music, which I was super excited about.
But like so many tech workers, he was also hoping for a big payout in the form of startup equity or shares. As employee number 1, Bobby got 25,000 shares.
This was a dozen years ago, when Silicon Valley was drawing huge numbers of talented young people with fresh memories of the dot-com boom, in which stories of 25-year-olds becoming millionaires overnight when their startup was bought out or went public were everywhere.
So in a way, it was weird. It's like you're dangled this huge potential windfall. And so you start chasing that, but then you realize that 99% of these companies aren't going to last past the Series A, and that your compensation, at least the shares, are worth nothing. So I've got 6 different companies, and I've been issued shares from 6 different companies. None of it's worth a dime. So
Bobby kept chugging along, working his butt off in a cramped room with 10 other coworkers side by side, opting for the cheapest healthcare plan with super high deductibles because he couldn't afford anything else. He actually lived in the same house where his company was based, and he worked every single day.
That sounds like my worst work-induced nightmare.
And all the while, he was really hoping the startup would take off.
I felt like this is how it starts. You start here, you don't end here, and this is the beginning of the journey. And the idea is to make a bunch of money, but you don't make that right out of the gate. You have to sort of pay your dues.
This is actually a pretty common story in early stage startups. And it's easy to forget that 90% of startups fail before they get too far. A lot of workers end up feeling kind of chewed up and spit out by the experience.
That was sort of how Bobby was feeling just 2 short years later, when 8 Tracks followed suit and folded, and he was out of a job. There was no IPO, no liquidation, and of course that meant no big payout. So did he abandon the high-risk, high-reward job strategy? Of course not. Instead, he did what any well-caffeinated 20-something would do.
I ended up trying to start my own company.
He went on to become co-founder of the website Bustle, a media outlet geared towards young women that's still going strong a decade later.
Bobby said he helped create Bustle because, well, he didn't have any other options at the time. But he also wanted to design his own version of startup culture after seeing so many red flags in his early work life.
My co-founders and I just felt like there was a better way. We had a philosophy that was far more focused on creating the type of environment that we wanted to work for. And from a policy standpoint, I think it reflected that.
In other words, he says, you need to treat employees as humans and invest in their success if you want them to invest in the business. Bustle offered perks that were pretty unusual for an early stage startup, like paid family leave and an unlimited vacation policy employees were actually encouraged to use.
And some of it was just super simple, like providing an office with a door that you could close.
They also paid particular attention to building a strong company culture and establishing a diverse workforce.
The other big thing, and it's cliche, especially coming from a white dude, which I am, is that like diversity really matters. And I cannot state that enough. And it's obviously not diversity for diversity's sake. We really put in effort to go after and attract and keep folks with different backgrounds and different ways of looking at the world so that you create a team that can execute and do a great job.
Bobby said that Bustle didn't just succeed in creating gender and racial diversity on the editorial side, but also within the product engineering team, which is honestly a really impressive accomplishment. Plus, Bustle did something unique in the hiring process. When job candidates, often women, undersold themselves by asking for a lower salary than they were worth, the company would counter with a higher offer that reflected true market value.
Even if we knew we probably had them wrapped up as far as committing to the job, we would give it to them. Even if it meant it was $5,000 or $10,000 over what they wanted. And I thought that was like a major thing. I thought like that had like a huge impact on the way that people looked at our company.
It seems like Bustle really understood the philosophy of total compensation, even if they didn't call it that. Meaning that they took a wide range of really smart steps to help support employees and meet their needs.
And as we mentioned earlier, Bustle is still operating all these years later.
After he left Bustle, Bobby worked as a product manager at Snapchat. And today, Bobby is VP of operations for another tech company. He's happy with where his career has taken him, but he does have one last piece of advice to help younger employees.
Get a mentor. Absolutely, 1,000%. Find somebody who's in a position that you want to be. So not thinking about trying to make $1 million when you're 21 or 22, trying to like learn a million things. Try to learn one new thing a day. Try to grow skill sets, learn different frameworks, read as much as you can about the things that you're interested in, because that's the foundation that ends up being like what gets you paid in the future.
I just love this last green flag from Bobby. It's not only great advice, but all companies should be thinking about how to mentor their employees. I mean, providing high-caliber workers with professional development and advancement opportunities is just a phenomenal way to add value to their experience, and it doesn't need to cost the business a lot of money.
Yeah, Bobby's advice about really focusing on learning things rather than trying to make as much money as you possibly can during your 20s, that really resonated with me.
Yeah, that line really stood out to me too. I mean, in my 20s, I wasn't really living that advice intentionally, but as I was working in journalism and then politics and government, I definitely learned way more than I earned. You know, I had a lot of privilege, so that was possible for me, but look, I wouldn't change a thing.
Me either, Adam. I like you just the way you are. Okay. So Bobby filled us in on what it's like to work for a company that does not practice a total comp philosophy and how he turned that on its head when he started to create his own new company and make sure that it did take that approach. Speaking of founders, wasn't New Belgium founded by a social worker? How does that translate into compensation?
Well, as a matter of fact, it's built right into our paychecks. When I log into our payroll system, I can see what the company spent on my insurance premiums or put in my retirement account or paid to make, wellness programs or other programs available, all of which have an economic benefit to my life, even if I can't spend them on cool dad gear. It's part of a long-standing commitment at New Belgium to open book management, which means every coworker, whether you work in the front office or you drive a forklift, has access to all of our financials, so they can easily track our business performance and they can understand their role within it.
This level of awesome transparency is one of the many reasons we reached out to Adam's coworker, Shauna Cobb. Shauna's the Chief Human Resources Officer at New Belgium Brewing. She's been a strong advocate for the total compensation philosophy and practice, which she often calls total rewards.
Shauna, thank you so much for joining us on Green Flags. Describe the philosophy behind this concept, total compensation.
Yeah, so the philosophy really is about all the ways that we talk about how a business or a company contributes to that financial reward for any of the people that work for them, all their employees. So really, it's about the money both that people have right away, that's right in their bank account or in their pocket, versus the money that's then deferred, money that they can use later. And also, I like to consider the money that they don't have to spend, right? What's the money that the company's paying on their behalf so that it's not money that's coming out of their pocket? Then you start to get into the things that, well, how are you starting to pay for when people need to be away from work, PTO or sick leave, that sort of stuff. And then you start to think about, okay, well, what are we contributing to a 401k, retirement money you can use later? Do we have bonus opportunity built in? And then the other piece is around like, okay, well, what are we paying for new taxes that come up? Or what are we doing around car allowances or stipends? But as you start to add all of those things up, you really start to get to a place of what your total compensation looks like so that people can see it really does add up. It really does become a lot of reward in there.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I had never heard the term before I came to New Belgium, and in every other employment situation I've been in, it's just sort of like, here's what you're going to be paid on a every other week basis. Here's your bonus, and maybe here's your 401k. I mean, those are kind of three things I would consider like cash in the bank. The rest is gravy. So I'm curious, before we dive into the details of total comp, why do you think we tend to think about compensation purely in terms of our base pay versus in the value total of all these different benefits, perks, and gifts from the company?
For me, I think it really comes down to we're thinking about the money that we have to deal with every day. So how am I going to get groceries this month and feed my kids? I think we start to think about those other benefits when it becomes impactful on our lives. So when you have a major medical issue, you're going to really start to think about like, okay, well, am I going to have to pay this deductible, and how much is the deductible, and do I have that money in my account? Or maybe I don't even have insurance and I don't know how I'm going to afford this at all. So I think that when people are living without kind of their core needs met, why are we thinking about compensation purely in terms of our base pay? It goes back to what are the challenges that we're being faced with that are keeping us focused on that.
At the other side of the spectrum, though, you know, for example, in New Belgium, we have an on-site wellness center with a physician on campus at the brewery for coworkers and their families. It's not only convenient, but it's covered under our plan. That is an example of something that is like very directly saving people money, time, gas, stress of finding a doctor, sort of all these different things. So what are the basic things that we include in the picture of total compensation at New Belgium?
Yeah, totally. So I think the first thing I would say is just really paying attention to what our purpose and our values are as a business. So for an example, one of our values is we work together to meet the myriad needs of the company, our coworkers, and our families. We take that and we start to think about, okay, well, how can we start to support this within the total rewards that we're offering? So looking at what are all the options that we do to provide time away from work when people are unable to be here and they have to go tend to other things. So providing paid time off, providing paid holidays, having personal sick leave time, paid caregiver leave, bereavement leave, domestic violence leave, jury duty, voting, all of those things. We have all of those leaves in place. And prioritizing health and safety of our coworkers. That's another one of our values. And so really, as we go to look at like our healthcare benefits, we're not just saying, hey, we just want to offer some benefits. We really want to pay attention to, okay, what are the deductibles? Is that actually a reasonable deductible for our plan, knowing that that's going to come out of their pockets? And then, of course, you know, the NBB wellness clinic option. I think that when New Belgium went to go and think about this idea, it's by far not a cost savings idea when you look at just the dollars. But when you look at the invaluable benefit that our people get from having an on-site clinic, they don't have to navigate a complex healthcare system. They have a relationship with someone that they trust. So that's the human-powered gold, if you will, that you can really tap into when you start to think about how businesses can really support and elevate our humans within our business.
Are there like things that surprise you or surprise people, either that we do or maybe other benefits or perks other companies might provide that actually provide a significant value, even financial or economic value to coworkers?
I'll say the thing that people get most excited about when they think about working at New Belgium, the beer perks, of course. People love our beer. But also the fun perks, right? We've got the Belgium trip at your 5-year anniversary. We've got paid sabbaticals at the 10, 20, and 30-year anniversaries. We have a volunteering perk. So you can earn 1 hour of PTO for every 2 hours of volunteering that you do. We have a cap on that, but people really like that. So I think that that's another one that people are always pleasantly surprised by.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. So let's move to green flags, right? You don't hear people sort of like, I got a new job and my base pay is, $60,000, but my total comp is like $95,000. Like, no one ever says that. And I'm wondering, like, is that a vision for how the world could be someday?
Adam, I think it would be amazing if we get people to start to really think in terms about the total comp. So I do it often with coworkers that come to me and they're trying to decide whether they need to make a move somewhere, right? And they're just saying like, hey, well, they're willing to pay me $2 more an hour, whatever that is. I'll just use that as an example. Mm-hmm. But then when you really start to tell them like, okay, well, think about the other things, right? What do your benefits look like? Are you paying a premium for that? Is that going to be coming out of your paycheck? What are they contributing to your 401k? What does your time off look like, right? And they start to dig into the details. I actually had one person tell me that they were actually going to lose money. And that's typically what people find. So if that's the number one reason why you're leaving, you might want to rethink that. Part of that on the business side is we'll give them access to that information. Mm-hmm. So that being a part of just like our coworkers being able to go into the payroll system and see that information. And also we talk about it all year. We're very upfront. We're talking about, this is how this is changing. This is why it's changing. This is what it looks like. Coworkers really actually appreciate it, and it teaches them something so that they can make better decisions for themselves in the future.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the concept of open book management because it's not, I don't think, very well understood, and it's pretty rare. I mean, to really have like this level of financial transparency with coworkers. But I'm curious, are there low-hanging fruit in your mind, like things that maybe New Belgium does or other companies that you admire do for coworkers that maybe don't cost a lot to the business themselves, but do add a ton of value to the coworkers, sort of like holistically and economically speaking?
Yeah, I think the low-hanging fruit right now for companies, it's the place where I continue to see a lot of buzz around, which is around flexibility, where people work, when they work, how they work, whether that's their home or a local coffee shop, whatever that is. It really does have good impacts on people, and we're starting to find that it's a place where people kind of want to settle in and just work differently. So I feel like that's a big opportunity. I think the other one that I hear a lot about is just how are you growing your people? How are you developing them? And that doesn't always have to cost a lot of money. You can really look at things like setting up some sort of program for someone that you think has really great talent and you'd like for them to continue to grow and develop. And then who are the people that we can partner them with? And what are the projects that we can put them on to really start to energize them and get them engaged in that way?
Those are great examples. Okay, if you're giving advice to somebody who works at a very different company than New Belgium, one that maybe doesn't have open book management, what advice would you give them around how they can better understand their total compensation package?
Yeah, I guess where I would start is understand the business that you're in, understand the company that you're in, make sure you understand their purpose and their values. Don't be afraid to go and talk to the leaders within your organization, if that's a manager or an HR leader, because we're not scary, or an executive team member. I think when you go to ask questions about, I want to learn more about total comp or where are the opportunities that we have in this business, or maybe you have a really good idea about a way where they could get a little bit more progressive in their thinking or really push the needle on some things. I think you should engage in those conversations, but I would start by just asking some questions. And when you go in to ask those questions, I really think you should come with the frame of mind of assuming some good intent. And you'll be surprised because they may say, oh, we've really thought about that. And here's some things that we're hitting our heads against the wall on because this has just been really complex. Or, yeah, that's definitely on our plan. We're hoping to get that in the next couple years. Or, I didn't even think of that. That's an incredible idea. Thank you so much for sharing. And we're going to look into that more.
Shauna, really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate it.
So many green flags there, Adam. The first thing that strikes me is that Shauna brings up perks, like volunteer incentives and paid sabbaticals that traditionally I don't always think about as having anything to do with our compensation, but really do add so much value to our lives and truly make workers feel respected. And Shauna brings up something that, despite us touching on every single episode, I seem to forget on the daily. You can't get something if you don't ask for it.
Totally. And look, you can accuse me of drinking the Kool-Aid all you want, but I think anyone can see that when a company makes intentional investments in its people, those people feel seen, valued, and secure enough to really commit themselves to helping the business thrive. Compensation then becomes more about respect and appreciation. It's not exactly rocket science, but this mindset is still not super common in corporate America, especially when it comes to hourly workers.
So true. Compensation might not always be the first thing we think about when it comes to respect, but money is a signaling device for our beliefs and what an organization values. And I bring this up again because we also talked to Samantha Conroy. She's a professor of management at Colorado State University who focuses on compensation. But when people ask Sam to describe her research, well, she says it's about both the instrumental and symbolic value that we get from work.
And from an instrumental perspective, there are some basic things we have to get from our work. Most of us need to be paid, but we also need to get symbolic value from our work. So what does our work say about who we are? How does it affect the relationships that we have? How does it affect the meaning that we get from our lives? And so in my mind, total rewards is kind of all of what we're getting from going to a workplace every day.
Sam says research on the top 100 best employers shows that a workforce that has its needs met and feels a sense of well-being is more productive. And of course, that's better for the bottom line.
So the firms that were taking care of their employees better and were categorized as top employers tended to be better performing firms.
Sam also told us that work-related stress leads to negative outcomes like on-the-job accidents and injuries and a reduction in productivity. Research backs this up, showing that in the U.S. alone, the costs of work-related stress add up to over $100 billion a year.
Another important factor in maximizing financial performance is turnover. Sam says companies often lose good employees when they don't feel valued.
So to find a new person, to train a new person, and to get that person started will actually take at least the amount of salary you would have paid to that person for a year. And in some industries, it's 3 or 4 times the salary of that employee. So if you think about the way you reward your employees and how that can influence their well-being, you're going to have higher productivity if you have less stressed employees. And that also saves the company money and helps the company perform better in the long term because they don't have all of these turnover costs.
Sam advises that leaders do some legwork to figure out what your employees will actually get the most value from when designing total compensation packages.
There's this challenge that companies face sometimes where they don't take the perspective of the worker when they're going through the design process. So to this one person who's involved in design, a gym membership sounds great. But maybe for those particular workers, there's not enough time for them to actually use this gym membership, or the location is only beneficial to a few employees, but not to the majority of employees.
Keep in mind, a lot of companies have a varied workforce. And Sam says her research of late has focused on how to create different reward systems to meet the needs of these different teams.
So when you have part of your workforce that's able to work from home and, stay in their pajamas and sit at a computer all day, and then you have another part of your workforce that has to get ready every morning and come to a workplace where they then interface with customers. Those two workers are having really different experiences of the workday.
Yeah, because a worker who has to deal with customers may need more opportunity for recovery or mental health support. Because, let's be real, it's exhausting interacting with the public, especially in this post-COVID world where everybody seems to be just a little bit more entitled.
So, how can company executives figure out what's best for workers? How can they get the full picture of what life looks like for them and then translate that into action? Well, Sam suggests a simple but effective solution.
I think executives would benefit from going out and meeting their employees and seeing what their work life and experience is. I don't think they need to be undercover bosses to do that. I think they could just go to the locations where their workers are and learn about what their experiences are. And I think often that gets missed, having those kinds of conversations and finding out what their lives are like, not just what is it like to work at this counter, but what happens during those hours between when they leave work and when they come back.
And there's one other nuance to consider. Worker pay can vary widely in any given company. And what good is an extra benefit or two, no matter how intentionally designed, if employees are struggling to afford the basics?
So there's research that people need to have a certain amount of money, to pay their bills and to have some level of stability. And it's really not just a matter of how much people are being paid. It's also about the way they are being paid. So if you pay people in a way that is highly volatile, where their pay goes up and down a lot, that really can take a toll on people's health because they feel a lot of uncertainty and stress.
Sam says that when income goes up, well-being and happiness go up too. I know, shocker, right? But research also shows that once we hit a certain pay grade, our happiness actually doesn't go up that much each time we get a pay bump.
So I think that it is very tempting to focus a lot on compensation, but I think we're better off to consider the whole package in terms of our well-being. So when we look at a compensation package and maybe we're comparing to companies, a worker should be thinking about, is it worth it to make more money and be less happy?
That's such a great point. If you're looking for a job, it's smart to look beyond the paycheck and consider everything from who you'll be working with to flexibility around where or when you can work to whether you can feel good about the work, like morally speaking. And all of these things impact your personal bottom line.
So let's say you're a company leader and you've embraced the philosophy of total compensation. You've done the work of aligning your benefits with the company's values and the employee needs. How do you let workers know how much you're investing in them?
I've seen lots of total reward statements over the years, and they say, this is how much you were paid, this is how much your benefits cost, how much you paid, how much we paid, all of that. I'm not sure people realize how much a company is actually spending on them. I believe the numbers are maybe 40 to 45% of the cost of a worker is not their direct wages. And so I think it's great to quantify that for a worker. At the same time, there's a lot that you cannot quantify. So you cannot quantify what it feels like to be excited to go to work. You cannot quantify what it feels like to dread going to work. I think that workers need to be paying attention to how they're feeling about the job that they're doing, about how their health is being affected by the work that they're doing.
But hey, let's flip it around. Say your company is lacking in the total comp department. We'll call it half comp, or not enough comp, or not helpful comp. How can individual employees go about advocating for greater investment from their businesses in their own well-being?
There are a lot of ways you can have an influence. I've heard of people advocating for fertility benefits for their health insurance because their health insurance didn't include any kind of coverage for that, and then advocating with their organization and getting it added to the benefits coverage. I've heard of people advocating for better parental leave and being able to get that added. I've heard of people advocating for daycare priority so the company can build a relationship with a childcare organization and be able to give people priority on those lists because sometimes it's hard to get your children into childcare situations. I've heard of people advocating for more flexibility in terms of their work hours. So I think, you want to look at what are the things that are dissatisfying you and what might be a solution to that. And then talking to your manager or your coworkers, perhaps to your HR about what some of those things might be. And they may be able to implement them for you, or there may be some other solution.
Wow, Sam Conroy was like a nonstop party of green flags. I love the example she gave us at the end. Okay, moving on from my fangirling, it's time we run through the red flags when it comes to compensation.
Well, for starters, we can all agree that the most important form of compensation is indeed, and still, and will never not be your base pay. As Sam just talked about, if employees are struggling to get by on their bi-weekly paychecks, then you can throw additional benefits and perks and gifts and prizes and parties at workers all day long, and it still won't move the needle in terms of relieving their stress. Bobby Ciccaglione really brought this point home when he talked about living paycheck to paycheck in San Francisco despite working his butt off for a tech startup.
Yeah, and this goes way beyond startups. Wages have been mostly stagnant for decades, meaning that so many Americans are struggling just to pay the bills that they need to survive.
Okay, another red flag? when companies offer perks or rewards that employees can't take advantage of.
No shade to those who have taken a big chance on an early stage startup and seen it pan out with a big payday, but most of the time, it just doesn't happen that way. Think about all those shares Bobby owns that are worth $0. That's even less than my vintage matchbook collection, and unfortunately, I know that for a fact because I checked it out on eBay last night when my husband said I should list them.
Or, as Sam mentioned, it doesn't do any good to have a sweetheart deal on a gym membership if it will require an hour in deadlocked traffic just to get there from where you live.
We also learned it's important to define compensation holistically. Yes, it's pay and bonuses, core benefits, and all that other fun stuff. But it's also investing in having a company culture where people feel welcome and respected.
Right. And one where recognition is given but not fought over, and where open and honest feedback is encouraged. It's hard to place a dollar value on culture, but we know it makes our lives so much better and the business so much stronger.
And this is exactly where DE&I becomes so crucial to ensure pay and benefit programs are designed equitably with workers' diverse needs in mind, and that a culture invites new perspectives in. Unfortunately, this kind of thinking is still pretty rare.
Our final red flag? High turnover rates. When you lose employees because they don't feel valued, it costs the company a lot of money. Sam pointed to research that shows the expense of replacing someone, things like recruiting, lost productivity, and training, adds up to more than a full year of that employee's salary.
So, what are some of the green flags we heard that would help companies embrace this philosophy of total compensation?
Well, I really liked how Bobby took the horror story, I think it's safe to call it that, from his early job experience and then turned it into a series of green flags in co-founding Bustle. It really goes a long way to create a healthy work culture when you pay people what they're worth, even if they don't ask for it themselves. And you offer extra benefits like mentorship programs, while also putting serious effort into building a diverse and inclusive workforce.
Another green flag? Most people get health insurance through their work, but Shauna urges companies to really focus on the quality of those benefits. Companies should design health plans that don't stick workers with super high premiums and deductibles.
Right. Just because you have it doesn't mean it works for workers. And even though it can be expensive to offer the type of on-site health clinic like New Belgium has, Shauna told me it's the number one thing my coworkers mention that they value most, and probably the biggest retention tool we have.
Our third green flag? If you're part of a company's leadership team, think about implementing open book management, which means that a company is transparent about everything from profit to payroll, so workers can better understand the full financial picture and their role in it.
And that extends to the concept of total compensation. As Shauna pointed out, when you can itemize the investments made by the business above and beyond each worker's paycheck, it's extremely helpful for workers wondering whether or not to accept a job that offers like $10,000 more, but doesn't provide all those other things.
Plus, the simple act of providing consistent communication will help the company culture, which is a great side benefit.
Shauna and Sam both told me that offering employees flexibility can be a hidden source of enormous value to workers. Think about how you design work schedules and where employees are allowed to do their jobs. It'll go a long way towards increasing worker satisfaction and appreciation, and it doesn't need to cost the company a cent.
In fact, it might very well boost profits.
Look, the bottom line, when businesses expand the definition of compensation and they help workers do the same, it opens up a ton of new avenues for companies to invest in the well-being and prosperity of the people who ultimately power the business. And it turns out when companies put people first, folks tend to pour themselves more deeply back into the company's success.
And that's the total humanized picture of total compensation.
This is Green Flags. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app.
It'll help others find this podcast and hopefully enjoy it just as much as you do.
And make sure you listen to our next episode. It's a short but fun exploration of the various perks companies sometimes offer, including some totally bizarre ones.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite mini episodes we did in this series. It's so weird, so strange, and so fun.
Thanks for listening. I'm Adam Fetcher.
And I'm Maude Standish. Until next time.
See you later.
Hi, I'm Chris McDonough, and I've been a coworker at New Belgium Brewing since 2015. I serve as the executive chef in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I'm here to give credit where credit is due. Green Flags is a co-production of Odd Media and New Belgium Brewing. This episode was written and produced by John Hawes and Maude Standish, with help from Adam Fetcher. Post-production for Green Flags is provided by Talented Friends Incorporated, with original music and sound design by Jason Reimer. Our executive producers are Maude Standish, Russell Sansgary, Adam Fetcher, and Sean Belangi. Our communications guru is Megan Olson. Creative support from Zoe Evanitis and Kelsey Ireland. Special thanks to those who lent their voices to this episode, including Bobby Ciccaglione, Shauna Cobb, and Samantha Conroy. Thanks also to Dana Kelly, Abby Zarnecki, Laura Smith, Celine Wright, Steve Fetchheimer, and all the co-workers of New Belgium Brewing. You can find Green Flags on Spotify, Apple Music, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.